Hello, welcome to this webinar, which is an introduction to uh, homes for autistic people with sensory differences. And this is being co-produced between NHS England and Neurodiverse Connection. So I'm Claire Skidmore. I'm the National Strategic Housing Lead in the Learning Disability and Autism Programme at NHS England. And I'll just ask you to introduce yourself, Jill.
Hi everyone, I'm Jill Corbin. I'm a director at Neurodiverse Connection.
Neurodiverse Connection and NHS England are committed to promoting the use of neurodivergent affirming language. So the Neurodiverse Connection Guide to Neurodivergent Affirming Language is available on their website. So do go and have a look at that if you'd like to see that. But please note that in any of these webinars, as with any event where we've got lots of contributions from different people, we can't necessarily guarantee that all of the preferred language will always be used. So I think that's it from me. As I say, any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. I think we're going to start by watching a presentation from a colleague of Jill's, Chris Memmott, who's a neurodivergent associate who works at ND Connection. So can I hand over to Chris's presentation, please?
Roll. It's coming.
Hi everyone, my name's Chris Memmott. Welcome to an introduction to designing homes for autistic people with sensory differences. Today I'm going to be giving you a very brief overview of autism and why exactly we struggle with sensory. Hopefully I'll make that nice and easy to understand. One thing I will say is that I myself struggle quite extremely with sensory issues, and you'll find that what I'm talking about today is my own personal experience. It's not everyone's experience. I've given you some overviews, but this is what affects my life and the adaptations I've made personally. As for myself, I don't like big introductions, so here's a list of things that I've done, some of them anyway. But mainly I'm an autism trainer for the NHS, and I love doing sensory evaluations for care facilities as one of my main roles. So very quickly then, what is autism? What is going on? Why is it so difficult to put us into the correct housing? Well, firstly, it's a neurodivergence. It means it's a different brain design. It's not a learning disability. It's nothing to do with IQ. Even calling it a disorder is a disservice to it. The brain shouldn't be struggling. It's a different brain design. It's struggling because the environment we're in and the situation we're put in. There shouldn't be this struggle that everyone associates with autism. It is a specialist brain, and that means if you put it into the right environment, give it the right subjects, the right focus, it can thrive. It just requires a specific environment, and we are really bad as a society at creating individual environments for people. Often autistic folk don't find themselves until their mid-20s, 30s even, because then they're allowed to adapt their environment more around them. They've been given time to find their own path. We know that nearly all autistic people suffer from sensory overload, and it's also one of the lowest hanging fruit to try and affect change and make their lives better. So even if an autistic person doesn't suffer from it as their main problem, say they actually struggle more with trauma possibly or something like that, the sensory is just way easier to affect good change on. And so it's usually quick, easy changes, usually quite cheap, and it just makes the quality of life dramatically better. And again, reinforcing every autistic person is different. So today I can't give you a blueprint of what is a perfect autistic home, but what I can tell you is how to make it more neutral. The more neutral we can make it, the more so it's not harming people, they can then adapt it to their own individual needs because they will be different. So what I'm telling you today is hopefully some of the major things we can change, the big stumbling blocks that are quite easy to influence. And then I can give you some small tips as well on the small things that makes my life better. So what can a bad environment cause? Basically, it's overload. If you think of the brain as a series of roads, and you think of most people having a bit of a generalist setup, that means equal size roads going everywhere. It means that it's quite hard to flood those roads because the traffic just builds out and the roads process it quite easily. An autistic brain is a brain that has motorways and country roads. It's a specialist brain. It's made for some specific things, but it does struggle with others. Too much traffic down those country roads, it causes an overload. And what happens then is the overload on that specific road spills out and it starts flooding the roads around it. So imagine that I have very tiny roads for noise processing and for processing of hunger. Like those two roads can't handle the amount of traffic coming through. And what happens is that every day those roads get too much traffic, the cars just spill out onto the roads around it, and those other roads can't do their job. They're dealing with a traffic jam coming from another road. And so this is what happens to autistic brains. It's why we have such variable capability. It's because some days our brain is completely locked down in different ways. So some days we might lose the ability to do this or that, and it all comes down to just too many cars. And as I said before, sensory happens to be just the easiest way of removing those cars from the roads and one of the biggest generators of them. So it can cause, overload causes a massive fight and flight response. A lot of autistic behaviors, the lashing out, the running away, the classic things people think of when they think of autism, it's portrayed in media the whole time. They are fight and flight responses. They're panic. They're an animalistic response of we're overloaded, we need to get away quite often, or we need to fight to survive. You'll find that we get headaches very commonly, unfortunately. It's again, just the brain literally overheats. We have too much information in there. We can get migraines very easily and so on, which leads to irritability, it leads to frustration. We are being almost attacked, is how I feel, by the environment at times. And it means that I do sometimes just get grumpy. I do sometimes struggle to deal with the world. I pull away, we hide. A lot of us will retreat from the world quite a bit because it's just too much information. We're just absorbing too much and it's horrible. That's one thing we really want to make is to make sure we're not taking in too much information in the home environment. And also it can lead to lack of attention. It can push someone to breaking point. Often you'll have someone that has the classic ones like a breakdown. They have maybe they get angry, attack someone, something like that. And it's often not the trigger event you need to look at. It's what's built up the roads, what's built up the traffic to the point where that trigger event was the straw that broke the camel's back. And often that is environmental. And the issue is if we don't get this right, it stops the other stuff that should be helping us. So things like therapy, things like processing trauma, all of this stuff that's happening that we need to process, it can't if the roads are full. So how to choose or build autism-friendly housing? Where are good places? Basically, think the busiest area in the city. If it's next to a road that is constantly full of traffic, constantly full of people, noise, stress, it can feel like you're under attack from the outside world. Like I genuinely hate the road outside my house. Like I want to go out there with a shovel and dig it up so no one can drive down it. It drives me bonkers. So be very aware of where location is, as well as accessibility. Can they get in and out of it easily, or are they having to walk out into a hostile world every time, which means they'll get trapped inside? Big difference about walking outside into a quiet country lane, for example, than in the middle of a city. One is just so much information flooding those roads. The other might be very nice and enjoyable. So think about noise, people, aggressive wildlife. I don't know what that would be, but it sounds scary. Busy roads, other flats. If you're thinking about building autistic housing and it's going to be a black block of flats, how much extra noise is there going to be around them? What's going on? Have a think about it. And slopes and stairs. I come on to this a bit in accessibility, but be aware that a lot of us do struggle with proprioception. So having it a hard to access building or a difficult slope to get out of means we will be falling over a lot. We won't be moving a lot. We don't want to travel around that. So if possible, aim for somewhere quiet. Single story stairs can be an issue going up and down. So single story is often quite good for us. Open spaces, no narrow corridors or cluttered walkways. Think of it as we're struggling to process the environment, and every time we have to process where to put our feet, where to step, where to walk carefully, it's just extra traffic we're having to force through an already full road system. So the more we can turn our brain off while moving around, the better, basically. You can almost think of it like being blind, honestly. Like if you're building someone for blind folk, you have to make sure it's open walkways. You have to make sure things are in places you would expect them to be. There's no random sharp angles and corners. Like you can often think of it like that for us. So with inside the homes, accessibility. Firstly, yeah, again, we have severe proprioception issues, awareness of where our body is. A lot of us has vestibular issues, balance issues. Again, if those roads aren't of the correct size to deal with the input, they struggle to get the traffic out. If they're overloaded by other roads, we might have terrible balance that day. I played national level rugby. I should have amazing hand-eye coordination awareness of where my body is. And yet I've never walked through a doorway without walking into the doorway. I've broken my foot on the same bit of wall in my kitchen because it sticks out like 6 times in my life, I think. Like it is very annoying, but we need to have a very gentle environment. So here, if you think about the pictures that we got up here, we firstly have staircase. Make sure the staircase is quite open, not confined, to make sure the stairs aren't too small. Like if the steps are only about 3 inches wide, are they gonna have to walk on their tiptoes going up? Because that can be dangerous and things like that. Like make sure it's nice and accessible staircase. If we think about baths and like showers and such, make sure it's one they can easily access. Here we have an example, one we have to climb into a bathtub to get to the shower. Again, could be an issue for some folks. And then also think about changes in the flooring. So here we have one carpet to another. It can be quite disorientating. We're not sure what we're stepping into. And especially if there's a different texture between the one on the left, like the black carpet there on the left is actually quite long and thin, and the one on the right is very short and a bit bristly. And it means if they're walking around, they can feel that texture change. So just be aware, same texture on the floor, and try not to make dramatic differences in what's going on. Lighting, major issue. Firstly, stay away from fluorescent lighting whenever you can. Fluorescent lighting flickers and it really bothers us. A lot of people can just ignore it. It kind of works by having a U-shape inside and it flickers on one side then the other. It's why it's so cheap and amazing. But for us, we see that flicker the whole time and it drives us mad. I can't be in a room with fluorescent lighting. I just can't. I can't do it. So be very aware of that. Be aware also of direct lighting. If you look at the bottom picture there, you've got a very bright light bulb that's poking out. It means it's very difficult to be in that room because all I'm seeing is that bright light bulb poking at me the whole time. It's like someone's shining a light right in my face. It's very annoying. So look for things like lampshades, recessed lighting. The right picture there is in the kitchen, and it's one of my favorite things in the world, which is I don't turn the overlighting on in the kitchen anymore. I just use those. Wave the hand underneath, it turns on. Bingo. Wonderful. Exactly the right amount of lighting I need. Think of LED lighting is usually a good call, but make sure it's high quality LEDs. There's a difference in the motors they use. So cheap motors and LED lighting can result in worse than fluorescent issues, but the good quality ones, pretty awesome. And color schemes, think of pastel wallpaper. Again, you're just looking for neutral. It doesn't have to be boring. It doesn't have to be ugly or anything like that, but it does have to be neutral. If you're going into a place that's bright orange and then next room's red and all of this stuff, like it's going to be hard to deal with for a lot of folks. There's some who might love it and that might be what they're seeking, but they can make that change while they're there. It's like you start neutral if you can. And where you can avoid the busy architecture. So no random angles or low ceilings or tight doorways or random points on the wall or something like that. It gets distracting, it's visually annoying, and we can walk into it if it's possible to walk into it. So just be careful with that. Noise is a massive offender. It's not just the big noises like alarms or anything like doors slamming or stuff like that. It's the constant small noises. Again, they're adding traffic to the roads. So it's the small noises that really add up. So here we have an example of a boiler. I can give you a true example of where we had a young lad who for 90% of the year was an absolute angel. And then every Christmas, utter flip round, we had social services around, we had police around. It was a really bad situation for the whole family. There was attacks, there was horrible stuff going on. Like it was just like something flipped in his head. And so they brought in psychologists, they brought in everyone. They finally got him an autism diagnosis, and a couple of autistic folk went in and sat down with the family to try and talk to them about autism. And they were just really distracted and they were feeling really uncomfortable. And the family asked kind of what's wrong. They're like, well, are you aware of how loud your heating pipes are? Like it's like I'm under attack, it's non-stop. And of course the family hadn't noticed that. But every time it got cold, the heating pipes came on and the child lost his mind because he just couldn't cope with the noise. He felt like he was under attack the whole time, which led to, again, irritability, anger, and eventually a breakdown, an overload. So be aware, things like boilers, things like heating pipes, things like fans, things like washing machines. Be aware, like if you can, you want to make sure that noise isn't echoing through the house. So especially things like washing machines, tumble dryers, things like that. If you can have them in a side space that can then be like a door closed, so it doesn't echo quite through the house so much, that's wonderful. Otherwise, when they're on, it's like the house is no longer a safe space. And same with heating pipes. If you can get a boiler that's relatively quiet, please, please do. I won't pretend to be a plumber or understand how this stuff works, but the better you can do with this, the better quality of life you'll have with these individuals. When you can, double glazing all windows, cut out the outside noise, and be aware of wind noise. It sounds a bit silly, but like if you're building in a place that often suffers from like a huge amount of wind coming through, that is constantly adding noise again. So maybe the location needs to be thought about if there's somewhere with a bit of a windbreak instead or something like that. Just something to think about. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much to Chris for that that presentation. With no further ado, we're going to hand over to Jean Hewitt. And Jean is a inclusive designer who led on the Design for the Mind PAS, and Jean's going to tell us more about that.
So I am going to talk about the PAS 6463. As Claire's mentioned, I was honoured to be the technical author for that document. I've done a bit of work with BSI, and I worked with a steering group of experts with lived and professional experience. So it's very important that happened. So this is the title of it, PAS 6463, Designed for the Mind, Neurodiversity in the Built Environment. And neurodiversity, of course, very much includes all neurocognitive types, including autism. PAS stands, if in case you're wondering, PAS stands for Publicly Available Specification, which makes it sound very prescriptive, but it actually isn't. It's a voluntary evaluation standard and gives lots of ideas and thoughts. And I have to say, there's a huge overlap with what I'm going to tell you now, with what Chris was saying from his personal perspective as well. So we had a lot of comments, over 2,000 comments on the first round of public consultation on this document. And many of those were from occupational therapists actually working in the housing sector. So the content of the PAS is aimed at all building types and external spaces and environments for both public and commercial use. And that does very much include residential accommodation, as I'm saying here, and it covers design and management. We didn't cover specialist provision for deeper care settings. And by that, I mean perhaps special educational needs schools or dementia care homes. But there are still some content that would be valuable for those types of environments as well, I think. By and large, what we're trying to do with the PAS standard is to reduce the impact when people are living with a sensory processing difference. And what Chris was describing there very much was the hypersensitivity that can happen, the extreme physical sensitivity and experience sensory overload and so on. And as he said, very high numbers of people experience this. Around 70% of people with a diagnosed neurodivergent condition, such as autism, are believed to be hypersensitive. The other end of the spectrum, of course, would be hyposensitivity, where you're undersensitive and you seek out additional sensory stimulation. And I think it's fair to say that people may be hypersensitive to all of the senses or just some of them, and can be a mix of these two terms, hypersensitive and hyposensitive. Most of the PAS is focusing on this one because that's the one that causes the difficulties in the built environment. If you are an adult with hyposensitivity, for example, you can self-manage to a much greater degree by providing fidget jewelry, stimming devices, headphones with music, having, wearing bright clothing or things that you can touch and feel yourself. Whereas when you're hypersensitive, the environment, as Chris has explained, bombards you on a day-to-day basis, and there is no way of filtering all of that noise out, visual and audio and touch and everything. This is just a list of what the contents list looks like for the PAS. And as you can see, we start off with a few terms and definitions and explain language. We talk about developing the brief, and then we kind of make our way through the journey as you'd expect to experience it, ending up with safety kind of places and fire evacuation, things like that. And then in section 15, there's a little bit more on different environment types. We've got a little bit on housing, so in that section as well. So I will touch upon that. So we start off by developing the brief. So for new buildings, of course, you look at strategy and commitment from the outset on this, some stakeholder engagement, so making sure people have a voice when designs are going through and developing. And we link to the plan of work by the RIBA, and they have, since publishing the PAS, done a bit of further work. They've got an inclusive design overlay to the RIBA plan of work, which if you're a built environment professional on this call, you'll be interested to have a look at that. Now, that does kind of link back to what you should be thinking about in terms of inclusive design all the way through your journey. But in addition, in the PAS itself, we have this RIBA plan of work suggestions designed for the mind type activities at every RIBA stage. And I think that's really important to look at in conjunction with the inclusive design overlay. We know that every human has an innate affinity with nature through the use of natural materials. So that's a big tick really to try and do this in any sort of environment, including home and living spaces. So access to green space, views to green space, even use of natural materials inside, it is very helpful in reducing anxiety. So images of nature can be very helpful. And if you're looking at artwork in buildings and external common spaces or blocks of flats, for example, it would be much better to look for images of nature, replicating nature there. Another area that was of concern is transitioning between rooms, and certainly Chris has touched on some of these. So the layout and symmetry really matters. And it might even be the complexity of a block of flats in the common areas that is the issue. So you might have a lovely apartment when you get to it, but you've got this horrendous journey to get through those common areas. So anything that introduces familiarity and clarity and helps people to orientate easily is really, really important. I haven't put lots in today because of time around wayfinding and navigation, but it is a key challenge for many people. And I think the more familiar and clarity that a building can give you in finding your way from A to B, really, really helpful to make that journey around your home environment really, really easy. I also think within the home, lots of storage is important because that in turn leads to less clutter, and a cluttered environment can be very overstimulating as well. So having things put away properly is a good idea generally. Now, this section was an area I hadn't particularly thought of in a great way before we started the PAS work. And then as it was developing, it became very clear it was really, really important. And in home environment, I think it's even more so. So the sense of smell, olfaction. A lot of people can be hypersensitive with a very keen sense of smell, as it was, and they can experience smells that other people don't notice at all. So examples would be off-gassing of products like formaldehyde in carpets, even cleaning materials and substances that we use, but also, you know, cooking smells and waste smells. So if you're in a block of flats or in housing that's quite dense and close to one another, things like your neighbours cooking different dishes or how waste disposal happens, all of these things matter. And being able to open windows and to ventilate the space properly is really, really important. And obviously ventilation comes in where you can't open those windows because there's a lot of outside noise. Also, where we've got to have HVAC, heating, ventilation and air conditioning. It's kind of how do you heat and cool the space? That plant has to go somewhere. So if you're in a home, you might not have that issue, but in a house. But if you're in a block of flats, it's likely there's going to be some plants somewhere, perhaps up on the roof or outside in external areas. And if that's not dealt with properly, you're going to experience some of the vibration and noise from those devices. So that's really important too. And it brings me nicely onto the acoustics section. Lighting and acoustics were the two the biggest offenders that were discovered during the Helen Hamlin Society research, which happened before we started the work on the PAS. And people can be sensitive to all types of noise. So it can be really loud noises, it could be sudden noises, and it could also be that really annoying background hum or vibration. So we've popped into the PAS some criteria of what we think different types of spaces should be. And you'll see sleeping areas in there, dining areas, etc. A lot of that is based on mainstream buildings. And I'll come on at the end of this session to a few other standards you could look at, particularly for the home as well. That are a requirement. So modern homes generally should be getting a bit better than older homes. Double and triple glazing obviously can help to keep noises out. But even little things like being able to remotely control a bathroom extractor. So for example, if you're hypersensitive to noise, just knowing that you can enter the bathroom and use it and come out and not switch the extractor on until you're done is really helpful. Soft finishes in the place will obviously absorb some internal sounds, but they can't stop that flanking transmission of noises. So for that, you really need some appropriate design in the first place. But choosing those low noise appliances, and I don't think any of us really look at this enough until it affects someone in our family. But there's a huge variation how noisy and how much vibration you feel through an average washing machine or dishwasher and so on. So looking at those ratings really, really important if you have someone in your family who's affected. I wear hearing aids these days, and I we were noticing that our television was getting having to be turned up louder and louder, even though we were wearing those. And so we discovered this wonderful clear voice setting on that some TVs have that cut down the background noise, and that's made it easier and much more pleasant, I think, for our neighbours, that we don't have to have the telly up so high to have intelligible speech on our TV. So there's lots to think about in the types of devices that you have. I think one of the key things with the noise and visual as well, with lighting, is that in many of the new apartments that are coming up now, they're quite open plan living. And I think that presents a lot of issues in terms of how you create quiet spaces. So not every member of the family might be affected, but when they are, how do you get everyday activities for one member of the family without impacting those noises and those sounds and that activity on others? So I think that's a key thing, is to look at, when we're designing homes, how can we kind of segment them and create smaller, cozier spaces for people to escape. And then lighting, a big issue. And I know that Chris mentioned about, flicker. Jill will know from some of the work we've done on the hospital and a document we've produced on this area that LED is actually just as likely to have flicker as fluorescent if it's designed inappropriately. So the component compatibility is really, really important on this area. And there's a technical note that Bura Happold have worked with the NDTI on around how you can do this better in hospitals. But I think some of the principles are applicable to any type of environment, including the home. And of course, the thing with homes and hospitals and hotels, that if they are places where you sleep, you're supposed to be able to rest. Really, really important that those are safe places, and you can kind of get the recovery time that you need. Adjustable colour temperature was really, really important. So when we're having these LED fittings, yes, you can get mini lamps now that have circadian rhythm, but it doesn't even have to be as sophisticated as that. It can be that you have a combination of overhead lighting with one type of light, but maybe floor and table lamps. And we need sockets for those, so they need to be designed in. And just things like blinds and curtains as well, really, really important for daylight, glare and shadows. Daylight is great, but glare is not. And then on the surface finishes, colours that are muted rather than vivid. And there's been a bit of a reaction to this, where some designers have said, oh, you just want everything magnolia. We really don't. It can be any rich colour. If I describe this in terms of a pot of paint, the way it was described to me by a colour expert is adding 5% black to any colour will mute it. And then, of course, what you don't want to do is put too many multiple colours in one room, because that's very stimulating and can cause sensory overload. And where Chris talked about having 2 adjacent floor finishes and changing colour, the key figure that we found working with dementia unit in Stirling was that if it's less than 10 LRV value, that's our contrast, that will prevent the freeze that older people can experience. So people with dementia and so on will experience, but also that uncertainty and anxiety really about what you're stepping into that Chris was describing there. Floor and wall patterns, configuration tiling, avoiding strong grout lines and stripes. And then generally speaking, bringing in biophilic patterns that are less intrusive. They're less intrusive on the brain. That's our connection with nature. And then on the fixtures, fittings and furniture, many of those you'll provide in your own home, but for the ones that are built in, if you like, looking at, how symmetrical they are, what's the approximation, we've got people bumping into things, can we have some rounded corners? But, if you're going straight into a new apartment or home, quite often those kitchens will already have the dishwashers and the washing machines in there. So looking at, are they low noise? Are items like cupboards and toilet seats, are they soft close? Makes a huge difference. Every little noise counts. Using natural materials where you can, so that sense of grounding that you get from using timber and granite and things like that. And then the familiarity and ease of operation comes back in again with all of these types of fittings. Very much a home should be a sanctuary. It should be somewhere you can go and you can find your quiet space if you need it, somewhere to escape to, even in a busy household. So I really think a red flag is the open plan living, and how can we introduce and divide those spaces up? They're not as compartmented as they used to be, for sure. I've also found that many people now go for harder floor finishes, easy to clean. It's less likely to collect dust and cause asthma and so on. But many of these floor finishes are available with acoustic layers underneath that can reduce impact sound. So I've got one at home myself, and when the room was empty, I was getting a bit worried that I was made a mistake switching from carpet. But when it was actually fitted, because it was an acoustic floor, it was not an issue at all, which was a real relief, because I've got 5 young grandchildren who can scream at high level quite often. And when you wear hearing aids, that's not good either. There's a lot of stuff in this PAS standard around quiet and restorative spaces. It's not talking specifically about the home there, but I think you could take a lot of the advice from that section and apply it in your home environment if you're a parent or someone trying to make their own home environment better. I often touch upon this, mental health and neurodiversity, and having a neurodivergent condition and being hypersensitive to spaces around you doesn't necessarily mean you have poor mental health. But I think you can understand that it makes it much more likely because of the daily bombardment with the environments. Almost, Chris's term is, it's attacking him. And I think that's really where we're at. So those quiet restorative spaces can really help, and bringing in some nature and biophilic design, whether it's even just a simple picture on the wall or giving you some kind of timber and soft things to touch, can be really, really helpful. In terms of living, I said that there was a little bit more about living accommodation at the back. So there's a little bit of explanation there about how it applies. And I think there's also a lot that you can do retrofitting in existing homes as well. But I think it could be very tailored, obviously, in your own home environment. So a little bit more about the sort of measures that we take. But here you can see all of the sections that I've just talked about, the navigation and wayfinding, which are touched upon, flexibility of space and adaptability, suitable acoustics, lighting, avoidance of glare, temperature and touch, all should be taken into account. So we're very keen to see housing improve in the future. So in summary, what we're looking for with this PAS for any environment is an environment that gives people clarity about where they're going, what it's for, etc., where it gives people some choice and control, which could be to move away from an area, but it could also be how to adapt that area through switching, and also that calm space to escape to when it's too much. So those are the 3 terms, I call them the 3 C's, clarity, control and calm, that are really key. And I like to put this picture up. It's kind of saying, like, if you want a beautiful garden, you want different types of plants in there and you want them to thrive. Now, every single flower and plant has a different watering regime. Some like the shade, some like the sun, some might need some nutrients and so on. Why would we think human beings would be any different, that we'd all thrive in the same type of space? We don't operate in isolation from our environment, physically, mentally, or emotionally. So I think we need to kind of recognise there is so much that we can do in this space going forward. I put some slides in for later reading, really, about additional reading. But also when we're looking at acoustics in homes, I was talking to one of our acousticians earlier today, and he helpfully provided these kind of links to these documents, which are the ones people are working to at the moment. Everything from building regulations, which is the basic level, through to some of the British standards and the home quality mark. And they have an accredited scheme aligned to the BRE. So there's lots out there that I think we could be looking at to take this conversation much further.
Thank you so much, Jean. That was so interesting, and we've had quite a few people asking if they can see the slides afterwards, and you are happy for us for Neurodiverse Connection to put them on the website. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. So I think next we're going to hear from Jill, who's going to share some experiences and reflections as well. Jill, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so it's a bit of theme and variation, and I'm going to share some slightly more personalised accommodations that I've made in my home. So the presentation from Chris was really focused on neutralising a general environment that would be accessible to everyone, and I'm gonna challenge some of what he said. Not that I disagree with him, but actually also to show that we can personalise and we can do it differently. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about my home, and I bought this and didn't realise how much work was needed, and have had quite a significant renovation, and yeah, it's given me opportunity to really tailor the home to what's important to me and what I need. So I thought it was just rewiring, and then it turned out that the plumbing needed doing, and then I thought I might as well take the plaster off and insulate it, and then the windows needed changing, and so actually it's become a much bigger job. But I'm sharing this because I think a lot of the time when we think about autistic people, we think about autistic people in distress. We think about maybe people like there's a lot of the people that I'm working with, like the first thought is that it needs to be a detached bungalow. Um, and it isn't always the case. Like some people who maybe have some physical access needs, perhaps it needs to be a bungalow. When I was looking for a home, I knew that I couldn't live in a terrace because of the everyday noise that other people make. Semi-detached was absolutely okay because as long as there was a room where I could move away from the other people as a noise source. But anyway, I found this home and it had the important things I was looking for. So it was on a very quiet road. It's in a village. It has outdoor space, which is important both for me and my dog. So I'm going to talk around some of the kind of more specific accommodations that I make. And some of these are really everyday things, and some of them are very particular to me. So I have this, it has been a building site. It is a work in progress. I have this garden, and at the end of my garden is an enormous hedge. And I go out every day. I know the people in my village. I know the people in my community. I spend time with them socially, and I can be in my garden and not have to talk to anyone. So the really important thing for me is that this is a predictable and safe space. And if I have people passing who expect to talk to me and I can't predict them, it becomes really unpredictable, and that feels quite unsafe, and it can be dysregulating, even if it's people that I know and like. Um, so this, and I think a lot of the time we see this in shared accommodation, in shared gardens, that actually people are often the most unpredictable thing in any environment. And so how do we support people to be in spaces that are predictable? And it can be as simple as putting a hedge up, or having a divide, or having a separate part of the garden. Also, outside, so important. Really agreeing with Jean's comments around that. Okay, other important things. I have to start with my very beautiful little dog. Um, so she's the kind of the real key to home for me. Again, thinking about what might be important to and for people. Often, pets and animals are quite high up there. Um, so some of the things that I want to draw attention to in this photo, this door on the left. I actually had this built specifically, and it's sealed all the way around, and it has acoustic glass in it. And on the other side of that door is my fridge. Um, and it was quite an upset to my mum in particular, who felt very strongly about some kind of golden triangle, and the fridge should be in the kitchen, and I had to navigate it and negotiate it with the builders and get a special plinth made on the porch where it could fit. Um, but it is possible, and actually for me it was really important that if I'm going to be able to spend time in this space, if I'm going to be able to be comfortable in my kitchen, if I'm going to be able to eat in there, if I'm going to be able to socialize in there, I don't have that constant background hum. And this acoustic glass and this door is really, really effective, and it works very well for me. Other things I have is if I have company, then I'll sit down, but actually my natural preferred way of eating is to stand up. And so I had this breakfast bar made, and it's a kind of an appropriate leaning place. Again, like a lot of autistic people prefer to eat alone. There's some research from Brazil, I think, supporting that. And often having these just like places that work for us, that work in our life, where we can hover or be, can be really supportive. Also in the background there, you can see there's the kitchen cupboards, but there's also a shelf put in. And I had that made because I really struggle with lighting, particularly with LED lighting. And I had quite a lot of arguments with my builders and electricians who came around to understand my sensitivity, but they really wanted to put those downlighters in everywhere. and they just don't work very well for me. I find that there's a lot of glare and I find them very painful. And so I had this this shelf put in so that I can have under counter lighting even where I don't have bids. Again, it's quite a small change, but it really, really makes a difference to the functionality and accessibility of my kitchen for me. Yeah, in here there's quite neutral colours. Yeah, but it's that isn't, yeah, I don't have neutral throughout. Okay, so I've included this picture on the left, and it's a light switch with 3 switches. And one of the big changes that I made to the electrics in my house is I put more circuits in. So generally, if I'm in a room, I use lamps. I don't tend to use overhead lighting. Where I have got overhead lighting, I have a strong preference for pendant lighting because I can cover it with a shade, and it feels more manageable than down lighting to me. But yeah, having the multiple switches and having like under counter lighting is quite a small difference, particularly if you're doing the electrics anyway, but actually it can be really transformative. The window on the right I've included, so this is one of my bedroom windows. And we had a question that came up in the chat actually about temperature control. So a lot of buildings now, I think less in homes and more in services, perhaps we see this more in flats, but a lot of places are using forced air. And I find the noise and the running noise of that really difficult. I can't filter it out. I'm processing it all the time. It's really exhausting. And so to be able to open a window is really helpful. I've also got insulation on all of these walls and in the ceilings, again to manage kind of temperature control. I didn't have the frame in this window changed, but I did have acoustic glass put into my bedroom window. Again, thinking I love Jean's words around this as the space being a sanctuary. And the other thing that I've got here is this blind is it's actually an electric blind and it's on a timer. And for those of us who struggle with executive function, for those of us who have other kind of physical health needs or chronic health needs, actually kind of getting up and moving in the morning can be really, really challenging. And I find having my blinds on the timer and having natural light coming into my room really, really supportive of me getting up and moving on a morning. Yeah, so okay, so this is a slide that really challenges the kind of the plain and neutral idea. And to be clear, I'm a big advocate of plain and neutral, and in the spaces where I spend time, I've gone for calm, natural, generally pastel colours, and I really, really love the colour yellow. And so I've thrown a burst in a room where I don't spend a lot of time. Similarly, I have got this yellow and pink wallpaper in my hallway and on the stairs. Again, really, I wouldn't recommend this for a transition area, but actually where it's people's homes, we really can personalize and we can support people to make those choices and have things that they love and that bring joy. Also in these photos, you'll see, so in the left photo, building regs in bathrooms, very challenging. So I have got my extractor on a separate fan, but it's got a switch outside the room that I can turn it on or off. Usually I just open the window at the moment, at least. I've also got 2 light circuits. So there's the bright overhead lights that my electrician was absolutely unwilling to compromise on. He said he could put dimmers on, but he couldn't do it with confidence that they wouldn't flicker because of the driver and compatibility challenges that Jean spoke to. And so our compromise was to put a second set of lights in, and you can just see on the left of the picture there's quite a low downlight. And I've also got a downlight in the shelf that's cut into the shower area. And so this gives me a lot of flexibility and control. I can put a bright overhead light on if I particularly need it, but actually most of the time I'm using natural light. and those side lights and all of that in silence because the extractor's on a separate circuit. Also, lots of people with sensory sensitivity have a very strong preference or aversion to baths or showers. So again, having the choice and the options around that can be really helpful. Yeah, so I really advocate having both of those wherever that's possible, or if a person has expressed or shown their preference, going with that. I'm also just going to pick up on the fact that I have a stuffed black-throated diver in my bathroom. So I'm a big fan of birds. And yeah, like, to go with the things that we love and our special interests and these things that bring us joy and the collections again, like it's a real strength, and it'll really transform house to a home. The picture on the right, I just want to pick up on so that's the desk that I'm sitting at the moment. It's a separate workspace. So in Jean's presentation, Jean spoke to the noise and light being the really challenging things. In the work that we've done, I've certainly found that. Again, everybody's different, and some people have different particular sensitivity. But those are the key ones. Another thing that really came out of it was a strong preference for not sharing living space, unless it's with a partner, with a loved one, with someone that someone is really choosing to spend time with. Also having dedicated areas. Again, Jean spoke to this, but it really came through in our conversations, and having a space that I work in, having a space that I eat in and cook in, having a space where I might socialise or watch TV. Like that separation can be really, really important for us and can really support well-being, but also like focus on particular activity or task. So what else? So the last thing I'll mention before I stop is so this room, the bathroom on the left here, so it's actually an ensuite to my bedroom. And originally there was the boiler in there, and I knew that I would be challenged having a boiler next to my bedroom. And so I had it moved to the far end of the utility room that is kind of weirdly disconnected from the rest of the building. Yeah, so the kind of the detailed consideration of like where are the things that rattle and hum and make noise and are on either all the time or in an unpredictable way, like that kind of detail is really important to us. Yeah, okay, to me, I'll say, at least. Okay, so there is a lot more resources and information in our resource library as well. Yeah, so we'll share links to all of that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerald. That was really insightful, and it's always really good to see pictures and visuals. So thank you for that. Following those presentations, I'm really delighted to welcome the rest of our panel, who are going to be contributing to the conversation for the next hour. So we have today we have Jackie Martel. Jackie is a family carer with extensive experience of developing the right home for her son, and who has sensory, among other needs. And also Catherine Bennett, who's the CEO of Let's for Life, and also extensive experience of developing homes for a number of different people who have particular needs. So Catherine and Jackie, I don't know whether you'd like to come in. Do feel free to expand on kind of what you do and what your experience is, but also, do you have any reflections on the kind of what's been shared so far? Any kind of personal experiences, whether you agree or disagree, or whether there's any kind of other experiences you might want to share? And do you feel that people more widely in housing have a good understanding of the kinds of issues that have been raised already? I don't know who wants to come in first, Catherine or Jackie?
You go, Catherine.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for those presentations. I learned a lot as well. I completely echo a lot of what was said. And Jill, your house is beautiful. Thank you for taking us through the keyhole. Yeah, I think your home is such a personal thing. You know, you can represent yourself through your home, and when you see someone's home, you can get an essence of their personality. So everybody's so different, you know. So whilst there's some key themes and things that can be more consistent with design and to help, it's so important. I think the first and foremost thing is just to get to know the person. And so for us as a registered housing provider, we try and get the right house for the right person rather than just having a spare house and who's next on the list to do it. So we really try and get to know people, you know, what they like, what they don't like, as well as the more clinical things that might trigger them or be a sensory overload. So as with our application form, we try and ask those key questions about lighting, noise and sound, textures, heating, space and the flow, where they like to spend most of their time, to try and get the place that's right for them.
Thank you. That's great. I think that's a really good kind of start to the conversation. Jackie, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, they were great presentations and resonated hugely with sort of our journey as well. We've been very fortunate. My son, we've been able to purchase, he's been able to purchase a property through the HOLD scheme, the Home Ownership for People with Long-Term Disabilities. So he's a part owner with a housing association. So we were able to find a property for him that, you know, did start off with the basics, if you like, and he's got a learning disability as well as being autistic and having sensory issues. So, and did need a bungalow, and some of his sensory issues around noise mean that he can be very loudly vocal. So we needed to obviously think about the impact on neighbours so that people aren't trying to, the staff and he aren't, you know, obviously having to stay in a room which has been soundproofed when he's like that. You know, he needs to be able to use his whole house and garden at the whole time. A lot of the adaptations were done by the Disabled Facilities Grant, and that was quite a journey. And I just wanted to reflect on some of the things where I feel that because of some of his issues were around learning disability and mobility, I suppose at times. He does walk, but he can, again, due to sensory issues, sometimes refuse to move or sit, and sometimes you have to be able to facilitate him walk, you know, moving around the house. So they were really happy, you know, did widen the corridors in the house, but I felt that actually that was essential from a sense of space and you know, accessibility of the house from his sensory issues, as well as a physical need for care, practical issues, if you like. But I don't think DFG would have quite gone for them. There was, you know, rounding of the corners of the walls that we went for, which was quite a challenge. Again, it was seen as safety for the staff, but I think it was really important for him. The garden focus was quite hard to get in the DFG, and you know, we have done quite a lot of the work on that ourselves, but the garden is such an important space for him, and the flow in and out of the house. And again, I don't think that would have been prioritized. So there's quite a few different things. Magnolia, I loved your comment, Jean. No, Magnolia is not necessarily low sensory arousal. We've gone for very earthy greens and blues and things that he's familiar with from our house, where we know that that helps him be calmer. And the only other point I was going to say was, you did say, you know, you're concentrating on largely on the hypersensitive, and again, there's lots of issues like lighting, so we've, you know, gone for dimmable lights and not the spotlights, and certainly not lots of those little spots which can give you that visual. I've got quite a sensory sensitivities as well, so even I find it difficult walking in spaces with lots of spots. But you know, he also has hyposensitivity to lots of sensory issues, so he seeks pressure and response and things like that. So that's where, you know, his need for very robust buildings is quite necessary. And again, the glass, to make sure that the glass was 6mm safety glass with film, so that, because he does seek banging at certain times, and you can't just say, well, you've got to stop him banging on windows. So some of that hypo sensitivity, I believe, does lead to an even more robust environment sometimes, which gets overlooked sometimes.
That's great, Jackie. Thank you so much. So we're moving into the Q&A, and I'm really, really delighted to see the flurry of activity in the Q&A. So please do keep the questions coming. I'm gonna come first, Jackie, back to you with one of these questions, and then invite other people to comment. So we've had a question around, do you have any suggestions around considerations for sharing space with staff in someone's home? So I'll come to Jackie, and then Catherine, perhaps you might also want to comment on that.
Again, I think we were very conscious, because my son has 2 staff 24 hours a day, and it's waking night and that sort of thing. So you know, you do need to make sure that you know, that there's enough space. And we've been very fortunate that it's a large bungalow. It's actually a 4-bedroom bungalow, so that, because he also needs a room for his changing height adjustable changing bed, and he needs a room for his sensory equipment. And we do have, and again, he can't have paper and printers and things like that around in his space, because he will put, you know, he mouths everything. So you know, so there is a separate office space which is for all his paperwork and things, but the staff can use that. And the kitchen area isn't, it's almost impossible to make safe for him all the time, but we've got a very high breakfast bar separating the living area from the kitchen. And again, it's sort of more the staff space, but it's about culture as much as anything, I think. Making sure that people do remember it's his house, and that whatever space, if he wants to be in the living room and he doesn't want anyone with him, then that's for them to move somewhere else. And if he's, you know, when to do the hoovering, when to do those sorts of things, it should all be led by him. And that is about getting the right staff team, I think, as much as space, but more space than you think you need. Some of the houses with the properties with like a small kitchen, a living room, and those sorts of things, you can't get away from people. I think somebody said, you know, if you're living on your own, you need separate spaces, and I think very definitely, because otherwise a person can't choose to be away from someone very easily.
Thanks, Jackie. Catherine, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just like what Jackie said, really, we're big advocates of the REACH standards, that it's somebody's home first and foremost. So staff being in there, if they have a sleep-in room, to just not so much have it as an office, you know, to try and within the practicalities of that, of course, but just to try and do everything led by the person who lives there, whose home it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And I guess to add my comment to this, I think like one of the things that I really hold on to is people are the most unpredictable thing in any environment. And so I really encourage the staff team to think of themselves as adding to the sensory load, adding cars to the road, as you know, referring back to Chris's presentation. And to really consider, like, how do we minimize that? Like, do we all need to be here? Do we all need to be here all the time? Like, yeah, one of the things that I often refer back to is when I was at university and I was in halls, and there was people who were in the accommodation next to me, and their daily living noises were really, really disruptive to me. It created enormous anxiety and a lot of feelings, and they absolutely weren't doing anything wrong, but I was very, very sensitive to it and couldn't tune it out. And a lot of the time, what I notice is that somebody is struggling and dysregulated, and so that might result in them hurting themselves, or it might result in you know, some kind of injury. And often what happens is that we put more people in. You know, the system says, you know, there's a risk, so we need more staff, and actually that can increase the problem and the challenge. So I really encourage us to think about, like, like, actually, can we think differently about how we understand this, and what might be adding to the issue, and what might support us to resolve it differently. Yeah, but I really agree with what you've both said.
Totally. We've got a tenant who gets really, really distressed seeing staff come in and go in, you know, when they're changing shift. So thinking about where to staff hand over when they're coming on shift as well, and how can that be done so that tenants, people don't get distressed by it. It's a lot to think about.
And this is an open question. Does anyone have reflections on, I guess I'm thinking about people who maybe we've had question around care homes, or people who are in shared accommodation, or terraces, you know, where maybe there's less control over the noise that are coming from other people. Does anyone have kind of experience or reflections on how that might be differently managed?
It was the main reason I don't feel that Thomas could manage it, and we couldn't have managed it both ways for my son, which is why we had to go for a detached bungalow, really, because it is so challenging, isn't it? Shared spaces, for him, the unpredictability, as well as the fact that he's got no knowledge of who, you know, something's not his, but that's more to do with his learning disability. But yeah, the management of, you know, when he wants music on, but other times he doesn't, and he's very clear about that. So, you know, if you're sharing with someone else, yeah, so I find that I feel that there's not enough attention made to somebody saying early on that they would need to live on their own. And it seems to be that sometimes with supported living, it has to fail a few times before that's offered. But I think it's so important for some people that it should be top of the list for looking for accommodation right early on.
You're absolutely right. And it's the same for blocks of flats as well. You know, what we found out later on once somebody had moved in is that they like to open their window, and they're a bit of a night owl and make a lot of noise at night. And obviously the neighbours in the next door flats, even though there was a level of soundproof in between the flats, with the window open, it didn't work, you know, for that guy. So, like you say, you'd want to know all of that before setting it up to fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to pull out another comment we've had in the chat, which is someone suggesting a safe space pod. I'm imagining that's kind of similar to a tent that might create a separate space within a building. And we also this kind of links to another question we've had, but also thinking about like accommodations we can make individually. So you know, wearing a cap, wearing noise cancelling headphones, like none of these things are going to be a first choice for someone when they're at home, and it should be, to use Jean's word, a sanctuary. But actually, where we are sharing with other people, it might be that we need to self-manage in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm going to come to Jean. So Jean, we've had a question here now. Let me see. We're getting a lot of comments, which is really wonderful. So this is from Helen. So Helen says, I went to another presentation on this subject where 2 exits from every room were recommended for the protection of carers. And I would like to comment on that in a moment. But to you first, Jean, this resulted in some L-shaped rooms and quite open plan layout, but that's one of the things you said might cause a problem. Do you have any reflections on how you might approach or resolve that?
I think there are ways of you introducing items of furniture to kind of create a shielded place. A lot of people will feel safer with their back against a wall or the back against. So if you can introduce high back seating or anything that kind of comes over. So there are lots of seats and beanbag shapes and things like that. You can kind of make a safe sanctuary, I think. So I think that's something you could look at. And even curtains, having a ceiling track curtain that you can sort of temporarily divide, even visually, and if it's a thick enough curtain, it will take some of the sound down, not much, but some. So it depends what someone's sensitive to on kind of how you do that. But I think I'm sure many people on this call have been to kind of modern offices where they've got hybrid working now, and there are a lot of these kind of pod seats arrangements coming in. And I think what we need to see is some of those for the home environment, where they almost make you feel cocooned and kind of in your own bubble. And there's some lovely ones in universities that have gone in, and some of them are hung and they move as well, which is really nice. But others are kind of just floor standing. So I think there are things on the market that are for student space and offices that maybe should be starting to creep into the kind of domestic setting as well. And can I just pick up on one of the questions is very much about, well, I don't own my own home, I can't do permanent stuff, how do I kind of adapt? And I think you can't do everything, and the acoustics is the more difficult one to challenge, but there's lots of things like Jules said about plug-in floor lamps, and I've even bought some kind of under cupboard lights that are not wired. You just, got them £8, I think they were from Amazon, but they've got colour temperature, so I can put them on the warmer setting. And as I move over to that area, it just comes on, so I don't have to put the big light on at night and things like that. And it just feels much more gentle. You can add, table covers that are kind of cushioned that protect your table, but it also stops those hard corners and you walking into them. So if you've got a situation where you're only in there even for a holiday or a few weeks, a lot of these things might help. And even, you can put window manifestation on to get rid of glare. I know you've got your lovely automatic blind, but if you're in a temporary accommodation, those cling film type manifestations don't cost very much, and I think they can make a situation much better while still allowing some daylight through. So I think there are quite a few things you can do. I think the acoustics one is the hardest one to do temporarily.
Thanks, Jean. That's really helpful. Jackie,
I was just going to come in. Again, you can get different coloured bulbs that are dimmable. The bulb is dimmable, so it doesn't need rewiring, and you can have it on warmer colours and different options and those sorts of things. I think they're very good. And also I've known friends who've got large, duvet covers of different, warmer colours, and they've literally temporarily attach those to walls just to dim down a bit or make things a little bit more sound acoustically better. So there are those sorts of things that you can make it a warmer environment.
Thanks, Jackie. And I'm grateful to see that there's some suggestions and comments in the chat as well around stick-on acoustic dampening panels and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful to see. I think one of the things I just wanted to reflect back on that original question is around I think sometimes we expect autistic people to be dysregulated. So the thing, like, certainly I'm sure there will be some people who maybe there's a requirement for staff safety that there are 2 exits. I have a really strong feeling that actually if somebody is really struggling and really dysregulated and they're experiencing a lot of fight flight, then there's something fundamental that we're not getting right. And that might be something in the built environment. It might be that so often it seems, especially, we kind of come in and we just put all the lights on. Do they need to be on? Is there reasonable natural light? Is there a noise that's really disruptive? And we had a really beautiful comment and suggestion from Tim earlier around adjusting water pressure and changing the noise that was coming through the radiators, which fantastic, Tim. Thank you for sharing that. So like my very, very strong sense is actually if we're feeling like we need 2 exits, then kind of fundamentally we're not getting something right, and it likely the sensory environment is contributing to that. But I also imagine the social environment is contributing to it, and the kind of the unpredictability often of staff. And that I really hope and expect that we would be able to adjust so actually the person could be better regulated and they could be safe, and that supports the staff safety as well. Catherine, I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all.
Totally, and we find that even doors can be a trigger for people, people that have been locked up in hospitals, not being able to open doors and come into their own home, and then each room has got 2 doors in it. they get targeted. You know, we have had a lot of incidents with doors, and we're constantly trying to learn and understand. Yeah, what you say is completely right. There's something failing that person in that environment that's causing that. It could even be past trauma, like what Chris said in his presentation. You know, the things that you can change it most easiest is the environment. So we're still working to try and get it right for them.
Yeah, I often go, like, my go-to is often lighting. It's like if someone rings up and says there's a problem, have you tried turning the lights out? I think so often like the lamps. You can also get these plug-in cord-free night lights that offer a much gentler lighting. Yeah, that can provide a really suitable and transportable alternative. Okay. So I'm going to come to one of the earlier questions, and I suspect, Jean, this might be one for you, but there's people who are asking questions in the chat around considering and managing temperature sensitivity, and especially in small areas, or for example in a rental flat, or even in an office. Of course, one of the challenges with temperature is that we often need, I don't know, like a fan or an air conditioning unit or a heater, and often they add noise. Do you have any suggestions or reflections on how temperature might be managed, and how people might start to think about this?
Okay, I don't have any quick fixes on the temperature manager. It's something we were looking at when we were working on the menopause design standards as well. The handheld fans and things like that, and the blankets and so on. Obviously, as soon as you open the window, you're then letting any outside noise in, so that's tricky. It's a really hard one, and there might be people in the same household that want very different temperatures. So it's a tricky one, I think. I don't know if Catherine's got anywhere where this has happened in practice and you found a solution to it, but I think for me it was kind of more layers on and more layers off, and having some sort of medium moderate temperature, because you, even with the temperature changes in one individual, they can change very quickly depending on, you know, how anxious they are or what else is going on.
Yeah, it's same. I mean, a lot of where possible, we're putting in underfloor heating that can be thermostatically changed for room to room. We've got one individual though that doesn't like heat under their feet though, so you know, it doesn't work for everybody. But yeah, thermostats for each room, where possible, is an idea, and then obviously good ventilation in the properties for natural airflow.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess to build on that, I think to let people know that they can have a choice between noise and temperature, and to let them make that choice. So often, if I understand the reason for noise, and if I'm in control of it and I'm an active participant, then it's easier to manage. So, you know, if it's a choice between being too hot and having a fan on, then, like, you know, being active in making that choice. Of course, the more people there are, the more challenging that becomes. Yeah, and we might then need to be thinking about, you know, the kind of noise cancelling headphones or alternate space, or some of the additional acoustic management.
I think
I mean,
my son finds sometimes, I mean, he can't express it, but from what we observe is that sometimes we think his loud vocalization is due to trying to block out all other noise, and he wouldn't tolerate headphones on, but by playing sort of quite repetitive background music, you know, so Spotify playlists and things like that, that he's got to know that constant low level noise helps him block out the more unpredictable noises from outside and things. So sometimes that's quite a good thing to get into. It sort of seems like it needs to be, it needs to be quite repetitive style of music or something, whether it's a folk or something which hasn't got lots of ups and downs. It seems to help him just tune out.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Jean.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's some really interesting stuff being done on soundscape and adding sounds into the environment that cancel each other out. And I think it's just like the tinnitus machines can cancel out how you hear. So I think there might be some solutions there coming out. And I think the oral diversity group have been doing a lot of work in this space to try and see what could be done. And it's something that's being looked at in offices now, is how you can use everyday sounds like the heating and cooling systems to marry up with sounds that are being generated, and whether the two can cancel and then people don't experience them so profoundly. So I think it's an interesting area for research anyway.
And Thomas, I feel, is better when there is some hubbub going on than complete silence. That seems to be reassuring to him.
There's also some work been doing with sound absorbing panels where they can be fitted to absorb some of the kind of the building noise. And one of the challenges that I have been educated about is, so in my naivety, I thought, well, we can just chuck some sound absorbing panels up and it'll fix it. But actually, what I've learned is that if you just put sound absorbing panels up, you might put them in the wrong place. They might absorb the wrong frequency, and actually it might make the challenging sounds even louder.
Right.
So it is actually much more of an art form, but it can be modelled, and it can be tuned quite finely to absorb a very specific frequency, which is interesting. But again, it isn't a cheap fix. It isn't necessarily helpful in a temporary or residential environment. I think that's perhaps more suitable for some of the bigger builds. Yeah. Okay. So we're getting a lot of questions and comments in, and some of those, Claire, I'm wondering if you might want to come in on some of them. I saw that there was a question that came in around access to some of the grants, access to hold, how people might go about getting a shared ownership flat. Do you want to comment on any of those?
I'll have a go at some of that. I'm conscious of people posting who have a really big need for support and help around some of this, and I'm not going to say it's easy. I'm sure everyone on this call knows that it's really hard. On a really practical level, the hold scheme that Jackie's talked about is not available everywhere in the country. I think those of us who know about hold really believe that hold can be amazing, and that it should be more available, and that I think there are lots of people nationally who are wanting to find ways of making it more available more widely in the country. And that's a kind of process that I think is happening. I'm aware of some housing providers in the north of England who are now thinking about offering hold, and that's a work in progress. I definitely think it's worth looking at the My Safe Home website, which I put in the Q&A session, because they're your best starting point in terms of advice about hold and whether it might be available in your area, and how you might access it. It's hard because most of the time you do need some money to put towards a deposit. Although, as I say, there are some local authorities that are beginning to explore more creative ways of enabling people who don't have that money to have access, but it's work in progress. More widely, I think the real solution to funding is got to be a long-term one, which is that we're aware of some commissioners around the country who are working in health and social care, who are building really good relationships with their housing authority partners and developing a plan for housing needs in that area, and that needs to be linked up with the funding. And that is really what needs to happen in order to enable more people to be able to access this type of housing. So I know that doesn't help if you're kind of right in the middle of this situation at the moment. One thing I would say is that there is some national kind of guidance and recommendations. There's something called Brick by Brick, which was written by NHS England, which strongly recommends that where someone's in a hospital, in a mental health hospital, the planning for their future housing needs should start at the point of admission, which I think kind of has been mentioned previously, ideally before if it's a planned admission. And there's a step-by-step process, and there's a strong recommendation that that sensory differences should be considered through really thinking about that person's future housing needs. It is down to local areas to implement and to kind of to do that. So that's where obviously NHS England nationally, we work really closely with national partners and with our regions to support good practice to promote this kind of activity. And I think there is growing recognition that there needs to be that plan locally, and that people need housing. They need homes that are their own homes in order for them to live well. So I know that doesn't really answer all of the questions, but the solutions are around that local partnership working. So I would strongly recommend, if you do have a relationship with a commissioner, that they look at that brick by brick guidance, and they look at some of the other guidance that that you can see in the neurodiverse connection resources that are a really good starting point. Final thing, if I may, is that I do co-chair something called the Housing Community of Practice, which is where we spend a lot of time getting into some of the nitty-gritty around some of these funding issues and these kind of solutions, where people are really achieving great things in some places. And if you're interested in kind of getting into that in a bit more detail, whether you're a family member, whether you're autistic yourself, whether you have a learning disability, or whether you're a professional, please do join that community of practice. And I think perhaps I'd better I'll put my email address in the Q&A so that you can get in touch with me directly if you'd like to join. Both Jackie and Catherine are going to be star speakers at our next community practice session, so you can hear more from what they've got to share.
Thanks, Claire. And while you were speaking, we had a question come in. Does Brick by Brick cover Wales too?
It's just for England, so I'm sorry, and NHS England only operates in England. I don't think that there will be significant differences though in terms of what probably colleagues in Wales would probably be recommending. I think many of the issues are the same.
Thanks, Claire. That's really helpful. Yeah, I just as you were chatting, and I was looking back through the questions and the chat that we've had, and I see a lot of people commenting and sharing their own experiences and their own challenges and frustrations with the system, really, the challenges in engagement and support and costs, and I identify with a lot of what people are saying through the work. Jackie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, I think the place to start with all of this is actually when somebody's having, a social care assessment as well. If somebody does need support wider in their life, to really pull out those things that are related to accommodation, because it can help further down the line, but it's often forgotten about, I think, and particularly if supported living is likely to be something, that someone's going to move out of a family home or not be able to rent their own home in that way, to really identify the impact of having to share, if that's really not going to be in that person's best interest, and why local authorities do have a duty to meet need. It's not a preference. There is an impact that and there will be consequences down the line for a lot of people where sharing goes wrong, or the environment's the wrong one for somebody. So yeah, I just really stress about putting out the needs and the impact that will happen if they're in the wrong environment. And the other thing around disabled facilities grant, I think a couple of people asked, is that the new guidance that's been done does pull out more around sensory issues and around autism and distressed behaviour or challenging behaviour, whatever. I can't remember what they describe it as, but so they do identify that, because we were told initially it didn't matter if Thomas kept breaking his windows because safety glass was safe, and all sorts of strange things, or even bricking in all the windows, not all the windows, some of the windows, which obviously we chose a bungalow which had a lot of light because that's important to him. But so it does mention glazing, it does mention some of those soundproofing, it does mention possibly the need to have a separate room for somebody to, as a safe space, whether that's a soundproofed room or whatever. So and that might be helpful with housing benefit as well. So my son, one of the rooms that housing benefits accepted the rate because he needed a separate room for sensory equipment. So he needs quite a lot of sensory stimulation, bubble tube and those sorts of things, but he will become very hyper aroused due to the same equipment at some point, so we need to be able to close it away and those sorts of things. So there is more recognition within the disabled facilities grant guidance about that, but the local authorities do need at the moment to get you sending that guidance to them. They don't all seem to have read it, but also trying to get a more specialist OT involved, because we found our learning disability OT, because Thomas has a learning disability, was more helpful, but the housing authority still wanted the assessment to come from the community OT, and she didn't have any knowledge. So it's getting the right, even if you need to push for an independent OT assessment, I think that's a really good starting point as well.
Thanks, Jackie. And Catherine, coming to you on this, so we've had a question along these lines as well. To what extent do you think housing needs assessment really understand and identify housing needs? And in your experience, is there a focus on the mobility element, and is there an understanding of sensory social processing needs?
Yeah, we often find that we're brought into the conversation far too late. Talking about people's housing needs and housing preferences, like Jackie said, at the point of initial needs, if somebody's got identified support needs, the conversation about housing and environment should be starting there. And often people doing these assessments aren't experts on housing. So having specialist OTs or engaging with specialist housing providers that have much more awareness of what's available, and so questions to ask to try and get it right, it is important really early on.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I come back to probably part of the reason that we're doing this series and having this webinar is because the sense is actually that a lot of people don't understand. I know in a lot of the conversations I have, people are still perceiving autism as a behavioural disorder, and so we're really working to try and shift the understanding and to help people understand the sensory and the social processing differences and the kind of big and small accommodations that can really make a tremendous difference to our processing and our well-being. Jean, I've got a couple of questions highlighted for you, so I'm gonna come to you next. So yeah, thank you everyone again for all the comments and questions in the chat. It's really tremendous to see. So one of the questions we've had is should and could the PAS be applied for all new homes, all general housing stock? Like, why do you think it is that we're needing to fight for this, and these things that could benefit everyone are being seen as special adaptations rather than good practice? Why aren't we seeing this implemented more generally?
So from talking to one of our acousticians this morning, it seems that some of the latest standards are there and are good on the acoustics. But obviously we have a lot of housing stock that we have still to adapt. We haven't got the PAS isn't even mandatory for anyone really. It's not mandatory for offices or anything else, even where the money is there. So I think that might be some way off. But I wonder if another piece of work needs to be done around housing, and I think this is something I'd like to talk more about, and you know, probably with the built environment professions, about how can we do this and what sort of standard will we follow. I think the lighting, the LED lighting, having experienced what I did with you, Jill, and the hospital lighting, you can see how this is probably also going wrong in homes, and people shouldn't have to go out and buy, you know, additional lights. That there should be at the correct installation in the first place, and having additional sockets in the right places, I think, is going to be key as well. There never seems to be enough sockets for everything we want to plug in. But you know, even options around things like, you know, should the fridge always be in the kitchen, or could it be in a separate utility room, and have an option so that you can choose and say, no, I'm going to have it here, and the space is there with the sockets and everything. Sounds like a really good idea. So there's lots of takeaways for me today about things that would be relatively easy and low cost to be done at new design stage. And I think that's something hopefully the new government will have an appetite for looking at, whoever they may be.
Thanks, Jean. And I think to pick up on some of the lighting elements, like why aren't we seeing this in general housing stock? And to I guess to reassure a little bit, like we are having these conversations. You know, Claire and I have been having these, and others have been having these conversations with Homes England, and trying to develop standards, trying to look at blueprints, trying to move some of the general housing stock towards more sensory considerations, and there is some movement, particularly on outside space and kind of thing. But in terms of thinking about the work we did around hospital lighting, and you know, why aren't we doing this? We've identified it's a problem. We see that autistic people have an average length of stay in mental health inpatient services of over 5 years, compared to less than 50 days for the general population. Like, why don't we do something differently? And one of the big challenges is there actually isn't an evidence base. So we have a lot of very strong anecdotal information, and you know, particularly in the neurodiversity movement, people saying this is my experience and these are the challenges, and we're starting to be heard, and we are starting to influence the research. But actually, when we talk to CIBSE to try and change the lighting standards for hospitals, they were interested, they were curious, they want to work with us, and there is no evidence base that they would need to make these changes and recommendations, because of what the research priorities have been, and they haven't been set largely by autistic people. But I think it's a really good question, and certainly what we perceive is that actually what's beneficial for autistic people, like generally we're more sensitive and we will notice first, and we will be more affected. Actually, generally what's good for us is actually better and an improvement for everyone. Jean, I'm going to come back to you, because I think there are a couple of places, and I'm thinking particularly about people who might be experiencing sight loss. So there are a couple of examples where actually there is a conflict in what autism-informed design, you know, what we might need and what other people might need. Do you want to reflect on that?
Yes, of course. So I don't know if you're thinking about the Royal National Institute for the Blind. They've got for blind people, they've got a new London office up by the Grimaldi building near King's Cross. They took on an existing building, and they wanted to be exemplar for disability and sight loss and hearing loss and so on. They have a lot of patients coming in every day for their sight loss clinics. They have customers coming in for their shops and so on. But they also, when I talked to them about being exemplar for that, do you want to be exemplar for the PAS as well? They had a real appetite for that, which is fantastic. And I thought there was going to be a big conflict on the lighting. There is a difference. So if someone's starting to lose their sight, sometimes they like a slightly cooler light, and typically that can be a little bit too stimulating for many people who experience hypersensitivity visually to lighting. So you've got perhaps many autistic people might like a warmer light, and many people with sight loss would need the clarity that a kind of slightly bluer light, which makes you more alert, as we know. We've been reading these articles about, switch the blue light on your phone and stuff. So what we've done there is we have got lighting systems that you can adjust through the colour temperature ranges over every cluster of desks. And people are very respectful about it, and it's working really well. And they have, even just by their putting in the quiet room in there, which is for everyone, if somebody needs to get away for some reason, they have now got their own neurodiversity network. And they have people coming up to them saying, I can now go to work knowing that I can adjust the lighting, and I've got a quiet room. So just those two components in that type of setting will make a huge difference. So you can kind of see what you could do in the home setting as well. I'm also wondering, Jill, if there could be a desire, and if could be some funding there to pull together a second PAS that focus much more on homes and housing. And whether that'd be a good thing to do, because sometimes just a document like that can push things forward fast than it would be trying to wait for lots and lots of research. Because I think the evidence base, as you say, is there. Groups like this, they have that evidence, and it wouldn't take that long to collect. And there's so much more that could be done, really.
Fantastic.
Have I touched on what you were expecting, Jill?
Yeah, wonderful. And I'd love to take that forward with you. So thank you. That's very exciting. What a great possible outcome from this work and this conversation. So I'm looking back to there's a flurry of questions and resources being shared in the chat. I'm going to come back to one of the questions that came up earlier. This is a little bit outside of homes, but I think fits within the conversation. So do you have any suggestions for external space and streetscapes? And I'm going to come first to Catherine. I suspect this is probably Jean, you might have some reflections on this from the past, but Catherine, I'm curious, in your experience, like how much do you consider the wider environment and the location of the home and what's happening outside of the building and outside of the home?
Yeah, it does. So in our application form, it does ask about the importance of outdoor space. Often people need privacy, and like you were saying about your home, Jill, knowing that you're safe in that outdoor space as well, and that it's not overlooked. If people want to go out there naked, they can do without causing any issues. Obviously, it's difficult to always find that. Often majority of houses available, and there aren't that many options where they're not overlooked. So it's finding out how important it is for that person. Then lighting outside, what we're doing now is putting out those shade awnings as well, so that if people got the choice, so that they're not on a really sunny day whenever they will happen, they've got the choice of being in the sun or sitting in the shade as well, where there might be less glare and effect on the eyes. And then obviously it's understanding location wise what's important to that person. Do they go to the library every Saturday? Is there bus links? How are they going to get there? How do they want to live their life, and where would the ideal place work with? Obviously there's always going to be compromises out there because of the availability of housing. So it's trying to work out what you can compromise on and what's non-compromisable.
Thank you. And as you were talking, I was reminded of one of my favourite and very predictable TV shows, which is Location, Location, Location. It's different every time, but it's also very wonderfully predictable. And there's always a compromise, isn't there? So yeah, I really agree with we really need to work with people to understand what their needs are and how important it is and what we need to prioritise, because the chances are we're not going to be able to get it all and to get it all absolutely right. So really appreciate that. Jackie, do you want to I don't know if you have any reflections around, and actually you've already shared some, but just to give you an opportunity to reflect on the importance of like the streetscape, the wider environment, and the location of the home.
Yeah, I think it's really personal, isn't it? And it often is affected by where someone's grown up. You know, I've known people who, you know, they've lived in a really rural village and then they've gone into supported living and it's in a town, and so everything's unusual and unknown to them, as well as maybe not meeting their sensory needs. And vice versa. If somebody's always lived in a town, they haven't got the background noise of traffic, that they might find that quite unsettling. So, but I certainly, for my son, you know, being able to have a garden, that he loves being outside. You have to choose. He can't live on a flat, in that he has to be able to choose to go in, out, in, out, in, out, safely on his own. We're making sure we've got plenty of trees around, because again, he appreciates the light patterns of the leaves and that sort of environment. But again, that might not be what someone else wants. And I think, you know, we had a long debate about whether a residential setting up the road from us would be better for him, which is in grounds, if you like, where it's all supported living style houses, but in an old estate grounds, and that he could actually run out of the house and walk and explore independently, whereas because of safety reasons he has to have someone accompany him in his street. Other people, you know, absolutely, they want to be in a town where they can step out their front door and know it's just down the road to the local shop, and give them that independence and predictability. So it's hard, isn't that? I think that's one of the harder ones to say, some themes, but you have to consider all of those different factors, don't you?
Thanks, Jackie. And Jean, you've shared us some research. Do you want to have do you want to comment on this and let us know? I've put it in the chat that everyone can see.
Yeah, I don't know if that is shared for everyone, but Streets for Diversity was specifically looking at the needs of people who are neurodivergent and how they make their way around street type environments. So I think that is a start. It's not fixing anything yet, but I think having these types of research is really, really helpful. TfL, Transport for London, were the main sponsor on the PAS document. So it was a sponsored document, as you know, and I think the fact that they were sponsors are very aware of the important role that our journeys have on our lives, whether that is just to the corner shop or to your medical appointment, you know, to and from your home, or to your workplace and further afield. So I think we've got quite a bit in that PAS document already. But what we're seeing, I think, generally, certainly in busy cities like London, is more pocket parks going in, little oases, little places of what I call sanctuary, where someone could go if the noisy street environment is just too much, because the transport system in any big city is just not great for so many people who are autistic or have hypersensitivity. And sensory gardens going in as well. There's a lot of RNIB put a sensory garden outside. It's really nice on a busy road, but you kind of get that sense of a reconnect to nature. And I think we're seeing a lot of people putting that sort of thing on terraces, even in housings now, high rise. There are terraces now with gardens midway and things like that. And it's probably about creating those, not as kind of, you need visual supervision and for safeguarding and so on, but you can still create little areas where you can cocoon yourself into a seat or under a tree or something and feel that little bit away from everybody else. I think there's another nice one that could be extended further. We need loads of PASs now, don't we?
We do.
It's interesting,
I'm
actually.
counting on you to drive this forwards.
My youngest son is autistic as well, and his bedroom does look like a jungle. You know, and he's at university, and again, all the plants, well, not all of the plants actually, but an awful lot of the plants are transported backwards and forwards because again, that green space and greenery is so important to him, and making him feel that that's his space and him comfortable. But, you know, I'm a big, I live in a rural area, luckily, but it is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to draw us to a close. Before I do, I just want to offer an opportunity to any of the panel members. Is there anything that you have a burning desire to share, or that you want to reflect on before we finish?
I just want to thank everybody. I've found today, this afternoon, really, really useful, and I've got a lot that I would like to take away and start looking into further for Let's Life. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Catherine.
No, I think it's been really helpful. The only other point, I think, Jean, you did make it, but for me, it's about spare space. I find that a lot of properties that are being offered to people with learning disabilities or autistic people needing supported living are very small, and I feel that that can be quite overwhelming in its own right, but also it's not very flexible. So again, at times my son can have his dining table and chairs out, other times he needs it stripped back, and so that can go into, you know, into a sensory room. But without space, you can't be flexible and change things around, or have some, you know, and less cluttered, as Jean said. I think that's a big issue.
Wonderful, thanks all. So I'm going to ask my colleague to share the feedback in the chat, and I'm going to hand over to Claire for some final reflection.
We've had some really lovely comments in the chat, first of all, so thank you so much for everybody who's kind of commented, and as Jill said before, I think it's good that there's been some different reflections. I think that one of my takeaways is there have been some really good suggestions and ideas, including some in the chat that I'm going to follow up myself in terms of links, research, useful places to go and look. The importance of recognising that there are some general principles, but it feels like one of those general principles is the importance of person-centred design. So actually, the importance of working with people and families and really recognising that they're the experts in their own lives, and that so we can have these general principles that enable us to have the flexibility, but then that is then delivered with working with people and really understanding about what that person's strengths and the things they love doing and what they're going to want. We've had some really I think truthful and important points that have been made about how hard it is for actually lots and lots of people, that lots of people living in rented accommodation, temporary accommodation, don't have the housing choice. We have some real housing challenges in this country at the moment, as I think we all know. Funding can be really, really tricky, and so that's really hard, and lots of people don't have the choice at the moment to make some of the design decisions for themselves that really they need for their own well-being. So I think that's really one of the things that's motivating us in running these sessions. We all want to learn and see what can we do, what are the things that we can do that can make a difference. So the community of practice, which I mentioned as well, also have a similar sort of objective. A lot of that we do talk about funding and the money and kind of commissioning and the pathways. My final thing I just wanted to say is I know that Jean's kind of made a bit of a call to arms, which I think is really good and really inspiring, and I know that Jill shares that, and you may well be in touch with Neurodiverse Connection, or you may want to contact them, but I think also please do contact me using that email address. I'm really happy to kind of cover these sorts of issues more in future community practice sessions. We could even develop some kind of peer support network or kind of ongoing conversation. And I know that Jill and colleagues are really committed to continuing to update the resources section of the Neurodiverse Connection website. So let's hope we can keep the conversation going, and what might be possible if we can collaborate going forward. I think that's my final thing, except that we have got 2 more of these sessions coming up. I don't know whether you want to.
Yeah,
say
so we've
anything.
shared some links in the chat. We really welcome and appreciate your feedback on this session. There's also a question in there about what you might like to see in future. And we have a couple more webinars coming up. I've shared the link in the chat if you would like to register to join. These are all free. And we will be sharing blogs, resources and links that have been discussed, as well as the recording in the coming days and weeks on the website. So a final thank you to all of the speakers, Catherine, Jackie and Jean, thank you so much. Claire, thanks for hosting with us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thanks very much. Bye.